I've worked in corrections for a while, and I've seen hardened criminals break down before, but nothing prepared me for what I saw when they brought P. Diddy into this place. He wasn't the same man you see in music videos, smiling, untouchable. He was a wreck. And every night, without fail, he cried. But it wasn't just crying. It was something else. Something worse. At first, I thought it was guilt eating him alive, the weight of everything finally catching up. But after a few weeks, I started to realize it wasn't just the trial that had him like this. It was something deeper, something gnawing at him from the inside. The other inmates didn't mess with him, not the way you'd expect. They kept their distance, like they knew something the rest of us didn't. Even the worst of them, guys who would kill for a cigarette, wouldn't look him in the eye. The first time I passed his cell during night rounds, I heard him mumbling. It was fast, frantic, almost like he was talking to someone. When I stopped and listened, I swear it sounded like he was pleading. I didn't tell them, he kept saying. I didn't tell them, over and over again. The next day, I saw one of the older guards watching him, a guy who'd been here for decades. I asked him what he thought. He just shook his head. Some men carry things worse than prison, he muttered. One night, Diddy refused to eat. He just sat on the floor, arms wrapped around his knees, rocking slightly. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale like he hadn't slept in weeks. When I did my rounds, he grabbed my wrist, threw the bars, tight. I nearly pulled away, but something in his face stopped me. Listen to me, he whispered, voice raw. They're not going to let me make it to trial. I frowned. Who? His grip tightened. You think they'd let me talk? You think they'd let me say what I know? His eyes darted to the security cameras, then back to me. They don't care about the trial. It's just a show. I'm already dead. A chill ran through me. I had seen plenty of paranoia in this place, but this was different. He wasn't afraid of other inmates. He wasn't even afraid of the system. He was afraid of something bigger. Then came the night we found him, curled up in the corner of his cell, shaking. His eyes were red, swollen. He had been crying again, but this time his face was twisted with something beyond fear. He looked sick, almost feverish. He croaked. I felt my stomach drop. Who came? He swallowed hard, staring past me like he was seeing something I couldn't. You don't understand, he whispered. They don't visit, they don't warn, they just take. I checked the security footage later, just to put my own mind at ease, but what I saw made my hands go cold. Between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m., Diddy's cell door never opened. No guards went near him, and yet, for those 2 hours, he wasn't in his bed. He wasn't anywhere on the camera. When the footage finally showed him again, he was back in the corner, curled up, shaking. I didn't sleep that night. 2 days later, he stopped crying, stopped talking altogether. He just sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the wall, unblinking. When I passed by, he didn't even seem to register I was there. It was like something inside him had already left. And then, just like that, he was gone. No announcement, no transfer orders, just an empty cell. When I asked about it, my supervisor wouldn't even look at me. Drop it, he said. Forget he was ever here. I checked the logs. His name wasn't there anymore, like he'd never been booked in the first place. But I know what I saw. I know he was here, and I know something took him. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept looping through the footage, the missing time, the way Diddy just vanished without a trace. It wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. The next day, I asked some of the other officers if they knew anything. Most of them brushed me off. A few just gave me looks that sent a chill through my spine, like they knew something but weren't about to talk. One guy, an older guard named Ramirez, finally pulled me aside when we were alone in the break room. You need to stop asking questions, he muttered, stirring his coffee without looking up. Ramirez, come on, man. He was here and now he's not. You can't tell me that's normal. Ramirez sighed, rubbing his temples. You ever hear about the ones who just disappear? No transfer, no paperwork, just gone. He finally looked up, his eyes tired. I have, and every time it's the same. Big names, people who know too much, the ones who start talking about things they shouldn't. A knot formed in my stomach. So what, you think someone came in and... Not someone, Ramirez interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. Something. I scoffed, but deep down, I wasn't laughing. What the hell does that mean? He leaned in, lowering his voice even more. You ever hear about black site prisons? The ones that don't officially exist, places where people go when they're too dangerous to be left in the system. He tapped his fingers against the table. I think this place, our place, is one of them. My throat went dry. Ramirez sighed and stood up. Look, you want to keep your job? Hell, you want to stay alive? Then forget you ever saw him. Forget this conversation. Because if you don't, you might be next. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I passed a security camera, I had this creeping sensation that someone, something, was looking right back at me. I checked the visitor logs for the past week. No one had come in or out without proper documentation. No black SUVs, no late-night arrivals, nothing. But when I checked the security footage again, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. From 2 to 4 a.m., just like before, there was static on the cameras facing Diddy's cell. But this time, for a fraction of a second, a frame flickered in, a frame that shouldn't exist. I paused it, rewound. My hands trembled as I went frame by frame until I found it. A dark figure standing inside his cell. No uniform, no face. Just a black, featureless form, towering over him as he sat on the edge of his cot, staring blankly ahead. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the footage cut back to static. I shoved back to static, my pulse hammering in my ears. What the hell did I just see? I turned off the monitor and stepped into the hallway, trying to steady my breathing. The air felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. I needed to get out of there. As I made my way toward the exit, my radio crackled. Unit 12, report to Block C. I froze. Block C was where Diddy's cell had been. I hesitated, but protocol was protocol. I forced myself to move, walking the dimly lit corridors, every footstep echoing through the empty halls. When I reached the cell, my breath hitched. The walls were covered in deep scratches, long, jagged grooves, like fingernails had clawed into the concrete. And on the floor, in the center of the empty cell, was a single piece of paper. I swallowed hard and stepped inside, bending down to pick it up. Scrawled in frantic, uneven handwriting were 3 words. I told you. The lights flickered. My radio hissed with static, and behind me, from somewhere deep in the prison, I swear to God, I heard crying. The crying echoed through the empty halls, low and uneven, like someone was trying to hold it back but failing. It wasn't coming from any of the occupied cells. This was different. It sounded close. Too close. I spun around, my pulse hammering, but the corridor behind me was empty, just the dim flickering lights, the cold concrete walls, and the faint hum of the security cameras overhead. Then my radio crackled again, but this time there was no voice. Just breathing. Deep, ragged, wet breathing. I yanked the radio off my belt. Who is this? My voice came out more panicked than I wanted. More breathing, slow, deliberate. Then, you shouldn't have come back. The voice wasn't human. It was distorted, mechanical, layered like multiple people were speaking at once. My blood ran cold. I bolted down the hall, my boots pounding against the floor, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I needed to get out, now. I hit the security room, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands fumbled for the monitors, scanning through each camera feed. Most of them showed nothing. The camera just empty hallways, empty cells. Then I flipped to the last one, Block C, Diddy's cell, and I saw it. A figure stood in the middle of the room, its back to the camera, tall, motionless, its head tilted slightly, as if listening. The lights in the cell flickered, and for a split second, the camera glitched just enough for the figure to turn its head toward the lens. No eyes, no features, just a gaping black void where a face should be. The screen cut to static. I shoved back from the desk, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. What the hell was happening? I reached for my radio, but before I could speak, the screen flickered back on. This time, the feed showed my security room, and standing right behind me was the figure. I didn't turn, I couldn't. My body was frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I knew if I moved, if I even breathed too loudly, it would know. The radio crackled again. You're not supposed to know. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the screen was blank. The door behind me was still locked, and I was alone. But the scratches on the walls of Diddy's cell, they were now in my security room. I didn't quit that night. I should have, but I didn't. Because I needed to know the truth. And that's the worst part. I think it knows that too.